time, like I'm going to do this opportunity cost equation of like, well, if I do this thing I don't know how to do versus like if I just continue working, if I don't know how to, I can't. And like everybody perceives risk as, so people would say, you guys are innovators, you're entrepreneurs, you took this risk to start a thing. Like, no, we just fucking said we wanted to go learn a thing.
Right.
And we backed in and solved for everything else.
You had how many people?
We had 49,000 the second day. We were up 7. We still run it. We still own Coffitivity. We were up 700 or 800% through the pandemic, as you'd imagine. But this was 2013 when we launched it.
Does it monetize in any way?
It does. So we sell subscription to.
You sell a subscription to coffee shop sounds.
It's fucking cool, right? So we've been used in every country in the world. Like this global audience, I think we had 1 million users in the first 3 or 4 months. So we've got 20-some million folks across the world who have touched this product now. 50% return rate at like peak.
Hi, I'm Aaron Anderson. You're listening to the Reinvention podcast, and I'm here with my good friend Ace Callwood.
Hey there.
Hey, man, how you doing?
Oh, I'm good. Glad to be here.
When I started this podcast, it was mostly because I was fascinated with people who have pieced together non-traditional careers.
Yeah.
Right? Or people who have changed careers and ended up in some kind of weird space that no one else has.
Right.
You, my friend, are that guy.
So you say, I'll take it.
Right? No, I mean, you've been an entrepreneur. You were in innovation teams. You are a consultant, an international consultant right now.
Yeah.
You're a facilitator. You are a broadcaster.
Yeah.
All right, and do mediation and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I've been like a pseudo academic at
You've
one
been
point too.
Yeah.
Not like to your level, not a real academic, but like
School of business, right? You were
right,
your faculty.
an educator, if you will.
Right.
So
all those things. So what we got? Innovator, entrepreneur, educator,
speaker,
facilitator, consultant, all that sort of stuff. So you're the guy.
I'm a guy. I'm not gonna take that one. I'm a guy.
You are the model.
Okay.
For the people who listen to this are people who their careers don't make sense.
Sure.
Or they're in a career that is at a dead end and they would like to figure out some other way. You got to pivot around.
Yeah.
How did young Ace become like successful Ace at this point?
Saying yes to a lot is I think the answer, right? Like just say go do it, and this comes from like your world of acting and improv. It's like if you accept the gift of like an opportunity that somebody puts in front of you, it may work out. And if it doesn't, you know that that's not a thing that you want to do anymore.
And then over time, you gain experience in each of those areas you've said yes to.
Yeah. So my career path, I think, can feel pat and linear, right? Like I can lay out, I did this and I did that, and I can make it all make sense. But it doesn't feel like that in real time.
In retrospect.
In retrospect, easy for me to like start at, my parents like really well educated, we were like upper middle class, affluent growing up. So on and so forth. I kind of grew up on Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And we played Cash Flow instead of Monopoly.
Did you really?
We did. Like that was the board game that we played.
You grew up with like financial literacy.
Yeah, which is not the case, right? But like to contrast my education and like upbringing versus my parents, dad's from the projects of St. Thomas, mom's from North Philly, like the cut, the hood, right? And they got out. They met at the Coast Guard Academy, and it was like, we are getting out of these places to go, I think, kind of anywhere else and not do what our people did in these corners of the world. And that's not an indictment on where they came from as much as like, hey, we're going to level up and make sure our kids have every opportunity beyond that.
But what you're saying is that your parents set the direction.
Right. Very much so. Even to the point that they found I was a poor student, not because of lack of intellect, I don't think, or I was one of those kids who got labeled gifted. So like check back in 30 years and I'll tell you why I'm in therapy. At least on that front. I'm in therapy for a lot of reasons. I think maybe that's one of them. What my parents identified is, hey, you get C's. And if you pay attention in class, you'll get a B. And if you pay attention and open the book occasionally, you'll get an A. So you're like figuring out how to do the least amount of work to get a C. And so they pulled my ass out of school. Like they homeschooled me.
Really?
So my freshman year of high school, I was homeschooled, and therein lies privilege, right? Like dad's an officer, mom has her master's in engineering from Berkeley. eats differential equations for breakfast. I've
Right.
never beaten her at a game of Scrabble. Don't expect that I will in my lifetime or hers. And so, like, mom, just brilliant in her own right. And so she had me at home and my three little sisters, and like we had padeas, right? Like we
Right.
would like put on togas, and the girls thought it was a toga party, and it kind of was. Like pick at olives and like just like debate and like talk about the world in a way that was educational. Like,
Right.
can we spar and exchange ideas? And then I got to sit in the boardroom as my parents were buying a business my freshman year of high school,
No
like
shit.
watch them get the deal done. And so it was just like education that not a lot of people would have. But as far as direction goes, my parents created a lot of opportunities around how we'd be educated and what that would look like. And, you know, I'm a product of public school by and large,
Right.
except for my singular year at the Callwood Academy to like reorient how I thought about learning and education. And all of that tracked to a non-traditional degree, like in entrepreneurship, and then going off to like start and push and hustle. And so there's like half of this, like by design, my parents put me in an awesome position. Part of it was like leaning into that innate thing that is me. Physically, I happen to be a head and a half taller than most people,
Mhm.
right? At this point, as an adult, I'm 6'4", 315 pounds. Like I'm built
Right.
like a middle linebacker.
Right.
And so I always ended up in charge, right? Like
Oh, right.
responsibility was kind of foisted upon
Because you look like it.
Right, right.
And
so
you're
there's some
you're
of that.
intelligent and outgoing
And I speak well, right?
Right.
And so, you know, I hear the you're so articulate, and like I think for a black man in any
It
other
means something
circumstance,
different.
that's like a thing. But I'm like, yeah, no, I probably got 99% of folks as far as like being able to express how I feel about the
Right.
world and what I see. So all of that to say, I think culminated in being put in positions where I had to figure out if I wanted to be there. And then having the fortune of parents who like saw that I've always kind of been a rebel, and like if there's a rule, I figure out how I can break it. And if I'm charming enough to break the rule, and like I get a slap on the wrist instead of like thrown, you
Right.
know, the book at. And so all of those pieces come together, but it takes a lot of work to figure out who you are, where you fit, and why you're there. And in a little bit, I guess I'll talk about a framework that like really helped me in the most recent pivot, but it all kind of stems from like, do you know who you are, or do you have people around you who can help you figure that out?
Right.
My parents were really integral in like, these are the places that you do really well and fit.
So I want to take a quick detour before we go into
Yeah.
your business, because people ask me how I did this,
Yeah.
and I said it's really simple. I'm charismatic, and I answer yes, right? But this is the
Sure.
question. You're also charismatic.
Yeah.
What is that formula? Like, what is that? Like, what is it that lets you be the lead? It's not just that you're tall,
Mm,
right? It's not just that you're smart. There's you can light up a room,
mhm.
right? You know that you can walk into a room with anybody. Am I wrong?
No,
You can
you're
walk into a
accurate.
room with anybody, and you can I don't want to say command the space, but you're not at home in that space. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? You're never foreign in the space.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
is that?
Is it nature and nurture, right? You know, and therein lies the question. I think a little bit of both. Like I think just my innate something.
Right.
And I think what's interesting is like it feels like there's a value judgment on that. It's like you're so good at this, and it's like
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, but it's not magic, right?
no, it just is, and that's a thing that's really uncomfortable to settle into, right? Because some people have it, some people don't. I happen to have that, but also if you put like a spreadsheet in front of me, I just don't beautiful mind through it and know exactly what it's telling me. That's
Mhm.
not my innate ability. And so when I go to, you know, what is your thing, knowing that is good, right? So like where I find that as I hear people talk about like folks around town, Richmond or beyond, and it's like, oh, this person's kind of an asshole. Like
Mhm.
I have really poor experiences, and you'll have 5 people in a room and 4 will corroborate that, and I'm just like, I've never had that experience.
Right.
It's because people interact with me differently, and like I have to use that as a baseline to understand how and where I fit in the world. When I was an entrepreneur, like raising money, as we say in that world, it's yes is better than a no, but no's better than a maybe when it goes
Right,
to
right,
like
right.
asking people for money. And I found that the flip side, the double edged sword that is being charismatic and people like you innately, is I got a lot of maybes. Like the business wasn't great, but the founder they really connected with.
Right.
And so it wasted a lot of my time. I wasted a lot of my time. I won't put that on them. But I got maybes because they're like, "Ooh, we really like Ace, and we have to figure out how to make this work, but the business wasn't where it needed to be. So I say all of that to say there's actually no value judgment on like being charismatic or having the thing. I think a lot of that is innate. Some of it can be learned, but a lot of it, some people have it, some people don't. Knowing that helps you navigate the world. Like if I get into an investment meeting and they're like, maybe, I'm like, ooh. So I think that's because we're really connecting, but it doesn't seem like the business is right for you. So like, let me go back and like, let me continue doing work. And as and if we're in a place to raise next, we'll come back and have the conversation, but let's not leave this as like a maybe this will work.
So your experience is that you can tell when you're connecting with a client.
Sure.
That maybe it's connecting about the business and maybe it's just you guys are.
Yeah. I think that's requisite though, right? Otherwise, you know, and the flip side, if you're not the charismatic, like I can walk in a room and people like me, just knowing that, owning that at sometimes is like, look, our first interaction, my mom's like that. I love her dearly, but like my mom can like come off as abrasive in first interaction. And then like once you know Bernie's got your back and she's looking out for you and she will like bend over backwards to like make the thing, but she doesn't give you warm and fuzzies. I am my father's son in that respect. And like,
but does your mom know that? Right?
She does. Yeah.
And so she's able. Okay, so this is cool, right? This is one thing that I haven't come across before.
Yeah.
What you're saying is you got to know how other people perceive you. Like that's a really important skill.
We think it's like this internal, like this is who I am, this is how I exist in the world, and like I have a core belief that like the meaning of life is to commune, it's to break bread, it's to spend time with other humans. Not everybody sees it that way, but like that's why we were put here with each other, is to like spend time and do right by the people around us. And if that's the case, just knowing how we're perceived is more important than thinking we exist in the world away. Right. And so I think we've got to.
So it's not about you; it's about how other people see you.
Perception is reality in a lot of respects, particularly when it comes to like, oh, I think I'm great. If me thinking I'm great and like going out to the world and telling people I think I'm great, and they see that as I'm an arrogant asshole, like, yeah, well, it's kind of more what they say than what I think. Right.
Well, this is interesting because a lot of people are worried about how people perceive them and spend an inordinate amount of time worried about not being like instantly liked.
Yeah.
But you just said something really cool, which is that's not it. It's you got to know how others perceive you because that's going to impact the next step, right? If you know that your first impression is abrasive, now you can move from that,
right? Like you can decide what to do with that. If it's, hey, if you can get past my prickly exterior, you know, and if you can get past that, then we can be friends. But like, I'm going to let that be your thing. And like, that has nothing to do with me. Right. Or it can be, you just head it off at the pass. Like, hey, people, I'm really digging you. People think I'm prickly sometimes. So like, if you're getting that, it's just my face. Right. Like, however one decides to own that thing. Right. Like, I guess I've stopped questioning the thing and started deciding what to do as the second step. The first thing is the first thing. You can decide to change that or not. So for me, it's charismatic and like people just connect. Right. Like I'll meet people across the world and they're like, whatever it is, you've got a thing. I've stopped expending energy trying to figure out what the thing is. I've moved to, okay, let's like do right by people with that thing.
So now I get to use
it.
That's cool, man. That's very helpful. That's very helpful for me, brother.
Cool.
No, seriously.
I like it. Yeah.
Right. You're saying you can map it out looking backwards.
Sure.
So let's not map it out. Just tell me a story about an early, like when you didn't know all this stuff, what was one of the first projects or things you were doing when you realized, oh, this is, all right, let's go.
Yeah. It was actually so I started my first company in school. I ended up in school. I was like, I had made a series of decisions kind of with parental guidance and help, one of which was not going into the military, which like I grew up in that world.
So your military father said, don't go into the military.
So remember, both my parents were at the academy.
Oh,
so like both of them kind of had that
like, don't do it.
Space for guidance, and they both played sports in school. And so those were kind of two things that were really interesting. So I worked for the U.S. Army in high school and into college, which is a fascinating thing. And it was with the special forces. And so I always thought like maybe I'd go be a door kicker downrange somewhere.
And they said, don't do it.
Both my parents and my best friend's parents, like my second parents, one of whom was a Green Beret, which kind of led to all of the military work. They talked the two of us out of it. Like we thought we were just going to go.
Why?
Part of it was the reality of, hey, you guys are young and, you know, sprightly little 16, 17-year-olds, and you want to go kick doors. But given how intelligent the two of you are, The military is not going to burn an asset in like you're a door kicker for the rest of your life. You're
Right.
going to kick doors for 2, 3 years, and if you survive that, you're going to push a desk and
Yeah, yeah.
tell other door kickers where to go.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so there was just like this like level setting of like, hey, don't just go enlist. You're both going to college. And after college, like it'd be ludicrous to go enlist, like go to
Right.
OCS. And if you go to OCS, they're not going to let you kick doors as a career. Like you're going to be in some managerial type role. And so there was just this like very practical outlaying of the thing you think you want to do,
Is not
the
what it's gonna
direct action, like either like special ops, go to Ranger Bat, go to group with the SF guys. Like that's not going to make sense for who you are and how you go.
Yeah, my son asked me the other day, he said, "Dad, have you use any of your military stuff?" I was like, "I know how to blow stuff up. It just doesn't come in that handy."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it has translated really well in a route. Particularly working with the special forces. It was like they're the innovators of the military in a lot of respects,
Right.
right? Because the way that I work today is here's the outcome, figure out how to get there.
Mm.
And that has always been the thing that I've loved is like, there's the outcome. And for all of the roadblocks and the hurdles and people telling you no, and that can't be done, like that's not important because that's the outcome. And I found that special operators always did that. It was, yeah, we've got a mission. The mission is go take out that target or find that high value person or whatever that is. And like, you guys have more autonomy than a lot of other people who are given frameworks and boundaries in the military, right?
Right.
Like special operators are like, go figure it out.
So this gives me another opportunity to ask something I don't get to ask most people, which is about risk and how you
Mm.
manage risk,
Mm,
right? Because you're talking about special ops in the stunt world.
sure.
It's the same thing. Like you can
Yeah.
do anything.
Yep.
You can do anything. But let's have a risk versus reward
Yeah.
management, and so
Yeah.
the special ops people are going to start that way from the very beginning. You can do anything. We can do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Now you start putting some formulas on it in terms of how
Yeah.
much exposure are you willing to take on that.
I think that's actually really, really interesting. Like we could talk for 3 hours about risk. It's something like I talk about often and unpack and put frameworks around. But the short is, particularly in the entrepreneurial innovative world, innovation
Mhm.
world, there's this perception of people who live in this world are willing to take more risk. And academically, an entrepreneur does not take more risk as much as they mitigate risk better than most. Right.
Ah,
And so like
that's important.
the job is risk mitigation. It's so people see you jumped off of that ledge, right? That's what they see. The reality is I did all of the work to make sure I had my flight suit and my parachute packed and the, netting down below or the trampoline, you think of a
Right.
cartoon and all of those things. And so they think he's got rocket boosters on and he just jumped off the cliff to test this new technology.
Right.
And they miss all of the safety and precautions. I'd imagine the stunt world's the same way.
It's
right?
exactly the same.
They see that guy just did that stunt. The reality is we've got all of the things in the wings to make sure that's not as risky as perceived.
Yeah, you 100%.
Right.
You want it to be something you can repeat
right.
over and over again.
Right.
You don't want to be like, and as a matter of fact, if you're working with somebody who goes, I can just do that, you're like, I don't want to work with you.
Yeah. The other really important piece is risk is not fixed. It's dynamic, right? Like risk at point A, when somebody asks you to do a thing that you haven't done before,
Right.
the risk of not having resources, the time, the money, the skill set to go execute on that thing, we assess risk at a fixed point in time. Somebody asked me today if I can go build a rocket ship.
Mhm.
The answer is no. If I say yes, it's risky because I don't have the skills or the money or the time to build a rocket ship. But if you say yes, the first thing you start doing is building the competencies to go build a rocket ship. And so if you asked me in a month, after I've already said yes a month prior to whether I can build a rocket ship, I've now got more skills and I've perhaps like created a narrative that has allowed me to raise money to go build a rocket ship. And I've started like building core competencies or hiring. I'm mitigating risk in real time. So like the perceived risk at a fixed point in time at point A is different than perceived risk at point B because
you
I've
know more.
mitigated.
You know more.
Right. And by the time we get to the point where we deliver the rocket ship, it's no longer risky for me to have built a rocket ship. Right. And so we miss that like at point A, high risk, at point B, lower risk, at point C, when I'm delivering a rocket ship, virtually no risk in being able to build a rocket ship. But you have to have said yes at point A to get to point C. A lot of
Right.
people want to be at point C before they say yes. And point C is having built the thing already.
Oh, that's cool.
Right. Like we've missed that. And if all we do is perceive risk in real time rather than the dynamic aspect of building competency and lowering risk while we're delivering or executing on the thing, right? We miss that. And so we think about it as this like one singular point in time. And that's not how risk actually works.
Do you have an example, like a real world example? Because I love the rocket ship analogy.
Yeah.
But like, how often has this come up in your day-to-day facilitation or mediation? I'm guessing that this is at the back of your mind on a lot of stuff.
All the time. Yeah. Built my first company in school, and we started building this thing called Cycle Stay. It was we conceptualized this self-aware bike rack system. Like my business partner and I just loved riding bikes and building bikes and bicycles. And like that was a core part of our life. And we had a bunch of bikes stolen because we're in Richmond at VCU, bunch of hipsters stealing
Right.
fixies, right? Like, and so we built out Cycle Stay, and we learned very quickly a couple things. Like, from an academic perspective, we crushed it, right? We went and won our business plan competition and got an A in the class and like all of that. But the building of a business, hardware is hard. We don't love hardware because hardware, you've got to design and conceptualize and prototype and reprototype and do it again and rinse and repeat. And like, it
Right.
just was a long, cumbersome process. Whereas software, really interesting. We had no software background, nor did we have hardware background at the time, but we were trying to build this thing. The long story short on Cycle Stay is we like realized this wasn't the thing and we shut it down. But the next opportunity that popped up is probably akin to this. We built a company. We read a white paper that says, hey, a little bit of background chatter and clatter helps you do more creative work. So the science says a moderate level of ambient noise is conducive to creative cognition. And
Really?
what that means is sitting in a Starbucks is people love working in coffee shops because there's enough distraction in the background to dull your brain a little bit and make you more abstract.
Oh shit, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's the reason we have epiphanies while we're brushing our teeth or taking a shower. Like those aha moments that were like, so and so had an epiphany, the Doc Brown moment.
It's because
Yeah.
the mind is actually relaxed.
It's because it's a little bit distracted. Like people chattering in Starbucks and hearing the espresso machine go off and all of that distracts us just enough to start thinking creatively.
That's fucking cool.
Right. And so we took that insight. It was like an article in the Atlantic because we were kind of in academia at the time. We got hired by our alma mater to come back and redevelop curriculum for the program we had just graduated from.
Uh-huh.
Like you guys, you idiots went above and beyond. You like blew off class a ton, but like you went and executed on the thing. And we want you to build that in as a real world experience for future students. And so we were just in academia and like we pulled the actual research out of the Journal of Consumer Research and we dug into the study and like got into the nuance of it. And we said, hey, this be really cool. For one, we need to know how to build websites. And for two, this insight's awesome. We should build a website that plays coffee shop sounds. And we had zero experience in building websites. And like that was the goal. That was the rationale was, we could tell people we're building a website. We have no idea if we'll actually be able to do it.
Right.
But the only way to do it is to go build the thing.
And
so
that's your first level risk.
Yeah.
First level risk is, hey, that's a cool idea. Let's see if we can do it.
Let's see. Like, and so I think that's always been kind of wired in me and Justin, my partner. We decided to build the thing on a whim. I'll tell you how much we didn't know. We were looking for a designer in our like network of people we knew. And our dear friend, Nicole, came out of the School of the Arts, fashion. She's an interior designer, and we hired her, like brought her into the project of Coffitivity to be our designer. And like, turns out interior design and like graphic design, web design are very different things. But like, that's how naive we were at the time, right? Like, we didn't know what we didn't know about building things. We just knew that the outcome was we should know how to build websites because everything we're going to want to do is going to be web or like mobile app based.
Okay.
Like we had that insight and we have no idea if we'll be able to learn it. We don't know how long it'll take. We don't know so we just figured out what we should build first and we backed into everything else. Right. And so we ended up launching this thing. We even put a hard deadline for like a personal project. It was like, we're going to have this thing done by March. And this was like early January. So we took 2 months to build our first website. We launched, we had 120 page views the first day. So my mom and Justin's mom looked at it 60 times a piece because I think how that played out, right? The second day, we had 49,000 page views.
No shit.
We crashed our server. We were on a shared server with a bunch of other small websites. They're like, hey, idiots, you want to keep this thing online? We'll have to move you to a dedicated server. So we ended up on PC Mag's top 100 sites of the year. Hacker News, the Next Web, Mashable, Popular Science, Inc. magazine. We were on Time magazine's top 50 sites of the year.
Were you
that
really?
year. Yeah.
How old were you?
This was 2013, so I was 23.
Fuck, man.
Yeah, I mean, but it all stemmed from like, hey, there's a thing where most people are like, oh, I don't know how to do that thing, and like I have no idea how to build a website, and it's risky to spend time. Like I'm going to do this opportunity cost equation of like, well, if I do this thing I don't know how to do versus like if I just continue working, if I don't know how to, I can't. And like everybody perceives risk as, so people would say, you guys are innovators, you're entrepreneurs, you took this risk to start a thing. Like, no, we just fucking said we wanted to go learn a thing.
Right.
And we backed in and solved for everything else.
You had how many people?
We had 49,000 the second day. We were up 7. We still run it. We still own Coffitivity. We were up 700 or 800% through the pandemic, as you'd imagine. But this was 2013 when we launched it.
Does it monetize in any way?
It does. So we sell subscription to.
You sell a subscription to coffee shop sounds.
It's fucking cool, right? So we've been used in every country in the world. Like this global audience, I think we hit 1 million users in the first 3 or 4 months. So we've got 20-some million folks across the world who have touched this product now. 50% return rate at like peak. So of 2 people who come, one's coming back. We built out a mobile app that was like top of the app store for a while. Like we built this thing out over the past decade now, right? But in 2013, when we had no technical expertise,
I really dig this. I thinking about this like risk management. This makes my gears work in a way that makes sense to me, right? You're starting with I don't know what the risk is, but the risk of trying, right? It's a greater risk to not try than it is to try.
Yeah,
because it costs you what to try it.
It cost us nothing.
Cost you nothing.
I think we spent like $400 or $500 launching that website.
And then you get to a place you're like, oh, now we have, I don't know, you would call it in business proof of concept or something like that. In the business school, you would think that you'd start with a business plan. I think a lot of people think that you start with a business plan and you start with all the numbers. Like we will have this many subscribers and we'll build backwards from here. But what you're saying is if you think about it from the risk perspective, we're going to start here with an idea. What's the risk of taking this next step, right? There's a whole bunch of opportunities there. And then you don't know how much you can invest. You're not starting out with a business plan that you're gonna put in $10 million into this thing. You're starting out with a business plan of let's give it a shot, right? Let's see where it moves. And then the risk moves.
Oh, caveat, only slightly, in that there are some businesses that require that, right? Like one of the businesses we built was a bank for freelancers. Okay. Right? You can't just like proof of concept, can I move people's money in the thousands of dollars in increments, right? And so, you've got to get all the regulatory and you've got to raise money to build the right infrastructure to make sure it's secure, so on and so forth. So like Painless 1099 is a business we built and ran for 5 or 6 years and wound down because we couldn't scale it, was a very different risk profile, right? I go to jail if I lose somebody's money running a bank,
right.
Which is very different than we put fucking coffee shop sounds from Urban Farmhouse downtown in Richmond and Harrison Street Market, or Harrison Street Cafe rather, up on campus, right? Like we recorded audio. The audio wasn't clean. We cleaned it up. We put it on the internet. The barrier to entry there. So like the risk profile between 2 businesses is different. If one is opening a barber shop, proof of concept can come from, do I kill it at like cutting people's hair? Right? Like that's an easy thing.
Or proof of concept for like a coffee shop, or my uncle ran a garage, right? Yeah. But he started in his truck. Right.
Just wrenching.
Right. And sort of wrenching it up. Like
and so the question is, as we look at any opportunity, how do we mitigate risk? For us, building a website that was kind of seemingly benign is an easy thing to just kind of roll out and say like, here's a website, friends, mom, check it out. And it went viral, and that's awesome.
But mitigating risk for a business about moving money is different. But it's the same concept.
It's the same concept.
You're starting from, how do we mitigate risk?
Yeah.
Dude, I like that.
Most people start from, that's too risky. And it's like, but the risk changes over time. Risk is dynamic. It's not fixed.
And your job is not to take a risk. Your job is to mitigate risk.
It's control what you can control, influence the variables.
You're right, dude. We could talk about this for like
we could.
18 hours.
We could.
Right?
Yeah.
We could.
Risk dictates every single person's decision. You talked about like, will people like me or not, right? Like, how do we mitigate the risk of, we can be more empathetic. We can ask people questions. We know how humans are wired, right? I can get a human to do things that I want them to do, not in this like manipulative way. Right. Although I think every interaction between humans is manipulative. Manipulative has become a pejorative, but like
it has influence.
It does. It does. We can
Yes.
influence the way people look up at us and feel about us and the things we can try. And so we, as humans, our like core wiring is to avoid pain, either physical or psychological pain. So we're avoiding pain when we say, how do I get people to like me? People
Right.
not liking me is painful. We don't jump off the thing without a parachute because we're trying to avoid pain or death by extension, right? Like physical or emotional pain, as a stuntman, it's like avoiding physical pain.
Well, it's
You
death
or
and dismemberment is what you're really trying
Right.
to avoid.
You
yeah.
can mitigate that
Pain-
risk. And
pain
that's
is
the
gonna
job.
happen.
Pain
Pain is going to
inevitable.
happen.
Pain is inevitable.
Right.
Right. And
No,
so I
I'm
think
serious.
as
There's
humans-
some things you call you do a back hit, you fall on your back, or you roll downstairs.
right.
That shit always hurts.
It never feels.
It
great.
never feels good. What you're trying to avoid is the broken shit.
Mhm.
Right. Pain
Mhm.
is just one of those things.
Yeah. And so I think as humans, I know as humans, we are wired to avoid pain. It's kind of nature.
Right.
How we do that, I think, is where people see that thing is risky because the threshold or the potential for pain is higher.
Right.
And like, it's only risky if you haven't done any work to mitigate the potential for pain.
Right.
Right? It's less risky if you mitigate that potential risk. And that's the job.
So then here's the next question. How did you go from being a tech guy? You started with all this wild stuff.
Yeah.
Fell into tech because of risk assessment, recognition of mitigating it. But now you're in the tech world.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, let's flash forward to what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Which is
emphatically not tech.
No, now you're in a room with people and your charisma's kicking back.
Yeah. I think, and Scott, who I work with day in and day out, would say it probably similarly, is he and I both realized that I'm a better facilitator than I ever was a CEO. Like, arguably all of my work in getting people to write checks and getting folks to join an early stage startup with all the perceived risk associated with it and to like let us into programs and like let us learn with some of the best in the world. Like that was me facilitating conversations and
Okay.
kind of influencing people, right? Part charisma, part just like natural, I think, tools of facilitation and mediation. And so getting people excited about a thing and simplifying big ideas and making them palatable is, I think, what's made me a great educator and facilitator.
Okay.
All of those skills showed up for me as a CEO, but a
Okay.
lot of the other requisite skills as a CEO, I don't think I have or care to.
Like what?
I'm historically like notoriously a bad manager.
You mean in terms of organization or in terms of making other people do shit?
Very much the former. Like I'm not the structure
Right.
guy, nor do I particularly want to be.
If you think of the entrepreneur curve, you're
Yeah.
more the create new shit rather than run existing shit.
Like once we get to a place where that's consistent and there's a flywheel and you just
Right.
like tweak and hone and optimize, like I'm fucking bored.
Right.
Knowing that's important. So I've always been a better facilitator.
Okay.
And then the bad manager, right? Like I think my desire is that people I hire have the work ethic and orientation to great rather than good and like use of marginal time in the way I do.
So
if
you
I hire
just
somebody-
want to hold your hand out and say, if the thing is here, then we're cool, and if the thing's not here, why?
Yeah. And, so like this idea of we need to go celebrate, like I'm notoriously bad at celebrating because if we were successful, it's because we planned and mitigated risk and executed on the thing the way we were supposed to.
So there's no celebration. You did your job.
Or we got lucky and that's not cause for celebration. That's
Right.
cause for fucking debrief and triage, right? So like we either did the thing or we were lucky. And like, you want a fucking gold star? You want a cookie?
Right.
That's what the money was for, right? And like, that's not how humans are wired. And I get that, but that is my orientation to hiring and building a team.
Right.
And so I've always had to have somebody counterbalance and say, hey, we need to take the team out. We got to celebrate that win. We got to like, that's not my innate. For as good as I am with people, it's not the like, ooh, we've got to like do the small micro.
Well, because you're good with people, but you are not deliberately influencing people and trying to organize a team. You're not influencing people to be different than they are, to do something different. You're just
Right.
connecting with them where they are.
Right. And so I realized that like over the years of building things, like I need to hire A+ players out of the gate. And like that could be A+ because you have the skills and because you have this like innate ability and we can teach you some of the technical skills. But if you're a C+ player by like wiring, my ability to bring you from C+ to A+ is just tough. And that
Right.
doesn't mean you're C+ as a human. That's not an indictment on anyone's character. It's saying like what I need is for me to go kill stuff because that's what I'm good at. and bring it back to a team that I can hand it off and trust that they do the next thing. They need to skin the thing, and they need to cook the thing, and they need to
Right.
clean the dishes afterwards, and then like rinse and repeat while I'm out killing because I want to bring stuff back.
Right.
And so like having the space to say, this is who I am, I need to build a team around me is really uncomfortable, but really critical. So I learned that lesson. And as we wound down the last thing, I actually had some time and space to be introspective. And I was like, I talked about that like linear narrative. Everything I've done, like we started Cycle Stay, we realized we didn't have technical expertise. We built Coffitivity to build that arguably to mitigate the risk of not having technical expertise.
Right.
We got hired by the university and kind of went in our academic kind of world at the same time. We kept running Coffitivity, but took insight of, hey, a bunch of freelancers use this product and freelancers need financial support. Let's build a bank for those freelancers. And we did that. And I got to a point as we wound Painless down, couldn't scale it. And I said, I've not properly decided what I want to do. I've said yes to all these opportunities, which is great.
But you haven't actually planned.
But
you
I haven't like
you backed into the opportunities.
Right.
The doors were open and
Right.
you were good at going through them.
Yeah. So
But-
I stopped and I said, what do I want to do?
Right.
And so I built this 3-bucket Venn diagram, and this is where I was heading. Like this framework I think was really helpful. And when I have friends at similar junctures, I pass it off. The buckets are, first, what do I do well that people will pay me for?
Mhm.
I know that I run my mouth well, right?
Mhm.
I know that like I can be on stage and get people excited about a thing. I know that I can sit in a room and hear a bunch of different perspectives and synthesize those quickly and then get people to go do something with it, right?
Right.
Like those are my superpowers.
Mhm.
And everything I've been successful at has kind of been as a function of leveraging those superpowers.
So one bucket, what do you do that people will pay for?
What do you do well?
What do you do
wait, even what are you excellent at? I
Right.
might modify to. The second is, what don't you want to do? And
that's
this
good.
is a 2-part kind of bucket.
Which is where you found out you don't want to manage.
Exactly. Like the first part of that bucket is strength finders kind of thing. Like, what are you excellent at? And if you're not excellent at it, find people to cover your blind spots. So like, what are
Right.
you just kind of shit at? Should be in one side of that bucket. The second is, what don't you want to do? Right. And I mentioned spreadsheets, right? Like I can read a spreadsheet. I know what a P&L is. I can
Right.
go through financials. Fucking hate it. And I
Right.
don't want to build them, and I don't want to write them.
It drains you.
It does.
So
It doesn't fill me up.
first bucket fills you, the second bucket drains you.
Right. Either because you're just really bad at it and shouldn't do it, or because you've done it before, can do it, but don't want to. Both are okay. And like, we had to be honest with ourselves on where they fit. But like, either of, I don't want to do this because I'm trash at it, because I don't enjoy
Well, it's
it.
kind of like one bucket is what would you automatically say yes to,
Right.
and the other one is what
would you,
what
like, think
should
about?
you
Right.
learn to say no
Right.
to?
And then the last bucket is, what do I want to learn? Right.
Ah.
What do I
Oh,
wanna
growth.
learn?
Growth.
Yeah. Where do we find growth? And so I started, the first question you asked was, how did you find success? And as I said, yes. You're not able to fill out those 3 buckets unless you've just said yes to stuff.
Because you don't
Right.
know. You don't
For-
know what the other two are.
If I'm having this conversation with a college kid, it's go say yes, because the goal is to be able to fill up those buckets. As an adult looking at the next leg of career, perhaps, right? Like the same is true. You just should have enough data points to fill that out. And it's not to say the thing you do has to live in that middle piece, right? Like,
But that's a good direction to be looking for.
But it's directional. It's a good just kind of baseline of, where are my opportunities? And so moving from tech to here, I did that work. And I did a stint at VCU Health, which was great. I was on their innovation team.
right.
It was right as COVID kicked off. So I got to like put my skill sets as a fixer and a entrepreneur.
With meaning. It made a
Right.
difference in the world, right? Yeah.
Right. Like, and we took those. Justin and I had that opportunity together. And so it was like, yeah, everything's on fire. Work from like where you have Wi-Fi, home if you need to. Like that has been the past decade of our career,
Right.
as founders. And so we were able to leverage our skill sets at the health system to help build and kind of navigate and mitigate the risk of COVID. And that was incredible. But when Scott and Stinson popped up here at Envoy and said, hey, we run a firm that is focused on negotiation and facilitation. We'd love for you to be in the mix more.
And you saw your bucket. I'm good at that.
And I
I'm
was like,
naturally
oh my
good
God,
at that.
I told my boss, who was an investor of ours previously, my boss at VCU Health, I was like, the dream job just popped up.
But it's a dream job because it fills those buckets, right?
Right.
So it fills the things that you're good at,
Yeah.
that fulfill you. It lets you untick the boxes that you
It
the
doesn't
no buckets.
require the stuff that I hate, and it gave me some space to like learn.
So what do you learn?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, twofold. I'm honing my ability to go deep, right? We work with international NGOs and, 2 and 3-star generals and like we've just got this incredible client base, industry agnostic, but our niche is negotiation facilitation,
Mm-hmm.
like influence. How do we do that with powerful people?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we do. And so, some of the imposter syndrome of I've got a bachelor's degree from like a middling university at best, and I love VCU dearly, but like it's not a Harvard, right? And it never will be, doesn't aspire to be. To be in rooms with those from Ivy Leagues and master's degree, I've got a bachelor's, right? Like to be in rooms doing what I do, part of it is just a forcing function of this is uncomfortable. And the only way to get more comfortable with it is to do it, right? Like just to keep doing it.
Yeah, at a certain point, the authority to be in the room is that you've already been in 50 of those rooms.
Exactly, right? Like, so part of that is the growth. It's like to do more of that at a higher caliber in an international setting, right? Like I can do this with my eyes closed domestically, but to go pull in the context of a new culture in a different place and be able to be as effective and as charismatic or whatever that thing is, right? Like part of that is I have to go do it. So the growth is happening in that respect. The second was part of my negotiation to come into the firm was like, hey, we've got a garage, it looks like, that's open. I want to turn that into a motorcycle shop. And so a lot of people will say, even when I first did this exercise, it was, what do I want to learn that will further my career? What I so much appreciate is that I've shortened it to what I want to learn. I want to learn how to rebuild motorcycles consistently and well and effectively. But like when I'm working on the bikes, it gives me space, some of that intellectual distraction to think abstractly.
That noise.
It gives me.
I know a guy who's got an app you could play in the background.
I should probably put that on while I'm wrenching on motorcycles. But yeah, motorcycle seems like just such a divergence from what I do as a facilitator. And it is, but that's good, right? Like that creative outlet allows me to, it affords me the time and the space to think and wonder about the world and think about systems.
Active
and
meditation.
all of that applies back to the work that I do. I think I'm better as a professional. My clients are better for it because I had an outlet to go do leather working or play with watches or wrench on motorcycles or whatever that is. It makes me more refined, more polished, have different anecdotes from different industries, and it gets me out from behind my computer where I live often. And it allows me to like work with my hands, which I don't get to do as often.
Normally, I end a podcast like this by asking people, what advice would you give like your future self or your younger self? But I think the 3 buckets is what that advice is, right?
I wish I had done that earlier.
Right.
And I wish I had had that as a framework to know why I was saying yes to things. Like I'm saying yes to be able to say, I hate doing that, or I'm good enough for people to pay me, or just to go learn.
Well, it's kind of like if you're talking about learning, right? If you say yes because you don't know if you're good at it or you don't know if you like it, then it's this circle. It's like it's a cool little.
But then we remove the risk of saying yes to the thing
because you're going to learn something.
You're going to learn something definitely,
right?
And you're learning whether you like it or whether you hate it.
Right.
But it's not. There's a risk of saying yes to this. It's like that's the goal.
Well, this is also, but you also said like risk changes. So what you're talking about is what you would say yes to in your 20s is different than when you're in your 50s because you know more.
Yeah,
right. And the risk is different.
Our job is to aggregate data points and make informed decisions.
Right.
The goal is to collect as many data points as possible.
My friend Tara said, she went to some sort of career counselor or something. They were like, you should be a lawyer, and she's like, you're right, and I'm 40, so
law school may not be in the cards.
But I mean,
right?
but that's true. That's a different risk.
Yeah.
That's a different risk.
So go get more data points is what I would have said. I think I did that inherently.
I would normally end by asking that, but what I'm going to ask you is
a different question.
There's a different question, man. I love the framework. Tell me a story. I'm gonna end with like a recent story here at Envoy, because your work here at Envoy is fascinating. Just like, what's one of the more interesting last challenges or gigs or something that you did?
I'm working through one right now. Right, like my job is to influence. Really smart, sometimes ego-driven, sometimes not, like altruistic, but
they're high functioning people.
High functioning, for sure. My job is to understand what they care about and help them make decisions kind of through that lens and in a direction that is valuable for them and the organization. Right. Some of that work, some of my work lives in the DEI realm, and I think about it at a human level. Okay. We can call it DEI, but it's humans connecting with humans.
Diversity,
equity, and inclusion. Right. So I help big companies like set up their diversity councils, and right now I'm working with a group that is having a really hard time wrapping its head around transparency.
Mm.
And as I would say, we hear that organizations are transparent, and I think we think that means everybody knows everything. And so
Mm.
I'm playing with this concept of transparency. Um, what I take away from transparency is not that everybody needs to know everything. It's that we're able to articulate that we're on a need to know basis, and there's stuff over here. I want you to know that. As an employee of this firm, there's stuff in this corner. You just don't need to know what it is. Right? Like there are layers to what transparency means. And so I'm trying to get them to a place where they understand, hey, transparency doesn't mean we have to tell everybody what everybody makes on a salary basis.
Right.
It has to mean, hey, have we built enough trust and rapport, and have we told you enough that you trust that like we're doing right by people on the salary front? And those are two different things. And so I am having to use all of the tools that I use in my trade and my craft to make sure that they make the right decision organizationally to shift culture in the right direction. And I'm struggling right now.
Right.
I'm not doing it as well as I'd like, and I have to force myself to do so.
So what are you doing to address that?
Yeah, I have to go back. I have to eat our own dog food or whatever the analogy is.
Right.
I've got to go back and at a foundational level, do I actually understand what's motivating the people not doing the thing I want them to do?
Ah.
So part of it's access, and like I'm in this weird, particularly on the DEI front, like you kind of get parked off in the corner with
Uh-huh.
like the DEI group, and so you don't
Right.
get access to the rest of the organization. Where
Right. Because they think it's its own thing.
right,
They're
right.
not folding it in. Oh, and that's kind of the problem, right? They're
Yeah.
not folding it into everything.
So that's like part of the battle you're fighting, but also like part of like you're just relegated to the corner. And so, my job is to be in the room with executives, and, the DEI councils or committees they function a little differently in that like ideally representative of the entire organization. So it's not just the executives that I'm in the room with. So there are differing types of power in the room, and this perception of a lack of power in the room, and so on and so forth. And so that's tough. So I have to go back and say, where are we getting stonewalled, or where are there hurdles? Do I understand the stakeholders who are putting up these barriers? And can I get to them and then influence them to stop slowing us down, or help us speed up, or approve that thing, or talk about that thing differently, or understand the language? And so instead of, and keeping in mind, like we started kind of around like I've always been kind of a rebel and I don't do
Right.
rules well. So I like to rage against the machine,
Mhm.
and like I'm forced to slow down and use a little bit more tact and finesse and like strategy, rather than you're doing it wrong and you look dumb right now. And if you stop doing it wrong, you won't look as stupid, right? Like you can't
Mhm.
tell a client that. It feels like that sometimes.
You
though,
can.
right? Like, you can.
You shouldn't.
I have. We shouldn't.
Yeah, I
we
have to.
don't. And to their credit, it's not stupidity. It's sometimes just ignorance, like in the truest sense.
Or,
Yeah.
and this is what I think you're alluding to.
Yeah.
There's some deeper values that they're not acknowledging.
Right.
And
And my job is to dig to find those. And I have to remind myself that sometimes. I'm like,
Have
they're
you-
not doing the thing I want.
have you had resistance like this before?
I have, yeah. Shoot, when I come back to like what I'm learning,
Mhm.
part of it here at the firm with like incredible directors, like incredible fellow directors, and just an awesome team. And like the work that we do is I get to pull from their worlds of negotiation and litigation and influence and apply that to some of the hurdles that I
Right.
run into. And so there's this incredible wealth of like strategic support to say, hey, I'm running into this issue. Like, how do we solve for that? And so some of it is like, you already have the tools, like you'll figure it out.
You got to
The
go back.
other
You
is
got to go
like,
back and look deeper at the
right,
stakeholders.
right. So it's been like all of the things I run into, particularly with getting humans to do what I do, is what we do as a world-class firm.
Right.
And I have
So
to
you're
like
sort of
remind
doing
myself
five.
to go do it.
You're doing 5-level why. What's going on?
Absolutely.
Why is that?
Five
Why
whys.
is that? Why
Like,
is
do
that?
we get to the core of the problem? Are we solving for the right thing? And do I properly understand the motivation of the people I'm trying to influence?
The individual stakeholders.
So yeah, it's more eye roll. Like, oh, I should have done this at the onset, and I tried to get clever. And if I get clever, you miss things. And so don't be clever, just do the work.
Right.
And that's like the biggest thing I beat myself up on. Is like, I knew the answer to this already. And if I had just done it the way I was fucking supposed to do it, like I
Right.
wouldn't be here. So I get frustrated with myself.
But it's that same learning.
It's learning. It's the feedback loop, and can we tighten it and get that feedback?
I think you learn most by the failures that are painful, because I
Yeah.
think you learn most when you've learned the lesson twice.
Mhm.
Because when you go, fuck, if only I had done it right, I wouldn't. I'd be like, if I started just in terms of like I'm riding a bike and losing weight, right?
Mhm.
Fuck, if I had just started doing what I'm doing now when I was 20 pounds lighter,
Yeah.
I'd be 40 pounds lighter.
Right.
But now, and you're like, fuck.
Yep.
But that painful lesson
That's where we learn.
is where you learn. And what you're saying is you didn't do it perfectly.
Yeah.
But next time.
Next time you won't make that mistake. That's back to that avoidance of pain, right? It's just like, I'm going to make sure I don't feel that pain that I've experienced again, because that's how we're wired. We can like use that to our advantage. It's like, let me like actually internalize that this fucking hurt and that I don't want to do that again.
Last question.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing is like a mental model of this questioning process. What am I good at? What do I not want to do? What do I want to learn? Right.
Yeah.
And you're using that to get your direction, but you also have this in terms of your business, right?
Sure.
In terms of how you apply to clients. You're like, you're beginning to work out, or you have worked out, not a system, but a process, a stepwise approach to dealing with these problems, right?
Yeah.
And so what you're hearing now is that you skipped one of those steps, or didn't hit it hard enough.
Exactly.
And so is that right? Do you naturally approach things with this intellectual framework, or is this a thing you've developed?
A lot of the latter. Like I have just done things on gut, and I've done things on grit, and it's. I think a buddy of mine framed it best, and he's just this like prolific entrepreneur. He's from Richmond, happens to be, but we kind of came up in the business world together. And he's like, look, the goal is not wasting your life. Like the goal is not wasting your life. So do all of the heavy lifting up front. Ask the questions, dig and probe, and make sure the opportunity's there. Like do all of the things to mitigate risk is what he was talking about. But it works for clients too. Like do the upfront work to make sure you can actually get to an outcome.
Right.
Because like either you cut bait early, right, and just make sure you're on to the next
You got to know,
thing.
not a maybe.
Exactly. Or you get to some outcome because you have enough data to make informed decisions and do the right thing in the right way. And so, I've got to like remind myself sometimes, like, don't be clever, don't move.
But that bucket of things you want to say yes to and things you're going to say no to and what you're going to learn.
Yeah.
So that bucket allows you to take the failures
Absolutely.
and say, this is a good thing because this is moving me forward.
Yeah. Just you reframe some of that work.
So you're going to develop. So you didn't start out with this mental framework or how you approach clients, but
No.
But now you have it.
Yeah.
And it's continuing to develop. And you did that by starting to say yes.
Starting to say yes. Keep saying yes.
And focus on risk mitigation.
The yes helps you mitigate the risk is what I'd posit, right? Like if you've done the thing, then you can decide where that fits, and you know that you don't want to do that thing again, or you can execute on that thing again. The yes is actually the impetus for being able to say, is that risky or not?
This is very helpful.
Otherwise, it's just perceived risk rather than real risk.
Hey, man.
Hey.
This is exactly what I wanted.
Awesome.
This was very useful.
Good.
Thanks, bro.
This is fun.
Good. All right. I think we got it. And visit reinventionpodcast.com for transcripts and other free resources.